Kenya, land of the Maasai Mara, home of incredible wildlife and natural beauty. But behind the tourist postcards, there's a different story. Kenyans are facing tough times. The cost of living is skyrocketing. Food prices are through the roof. People are struggling to put food on the table. President Willian Ruto came into power promising change. He promised to champion the hustlers, the everyday Kenyans trying to make ends meet. But the reality is, many Kenyans are worse off than before. The economy is in trouble. Some say the blame lies partly with international institutions. They point fingers at the IMF and World Bank. These organizations offer loans and aid to developing countries, but these loans often come with strings attached. Strings that tie Kenya's economy to policies that don't always benefit its people. The IMF and World Bank, these institutions are like the wealthy relatives you try to avoid at family gatherings. They show up with big promises. They talk a big game about helping you out. But their help often comes with conditions. Conditions that can leave you worse off than before. In Kenya, these institutions have pushed for austerity measures. They've advocated for cuts to public spending. This means less money for essential services, less money for healthcare, less money for education. It's like trying to fix a leaky roof by removing the walls. These policies might sound good on paper, but in reality, they hurt the most vulnerable. They push people further into poverty and they create fertile ground for instability. Economic analysts, media, economic analysts discussing social costs of austerity measures in Africa. These austerity measures, while intended to stabilize the economy, often result in significant social costs. The reduction in public spending means that the most vulnerable populations suffer the most. It's a vicious cycle that exacerbates poverty and inequality. When people are hungry, they get desperate. When they see no other way out, they might resort to anything to survive. This is the reality in many parts of Kenya. The policies imposed by the IMF and World Bank have real consequences. They lead to increased poverty. They drive people to the brink. But it's not just about empty stomachs. It's about the erosion of hope. When people lose faith in the system, they look for other solutions. This can manifest in different ways. Sometimes it's peaceful protests, other times it spills over into ethnic tensions. The sad reality is that these international institutions often fuel the very problems they claim to solve. Their one-size-fits-all approach ignores the complexities of African nations. They treat the symptoms, not the disease. And the disease, my friends, is a legacy of exploitation and unfair global systems. Kenyan citizens expressing skepticism towards imposed policies. We are told that these policies are for our own good, but we don't see the benefits. Instead, we see our children going hungry and our communities struggling. It's hard to believe in promises when your stomach is empty. Let's be honest, folks, the West has a long and complicated history with Africa, and by complicated, I mean exploitative. For centuries, European powers carved up the continent like a birthday cake. They plundered its resources. They enslaved its people. Colonialism might be officially over, but its legacy lingers like a bad smell. The borders drawn by colonizers often grouped together different ethnicities with long-standing rivalries. This created tensions that persist to this day. And then came the Cold War, a time when the US and Soviet Union were playing a global game of chess. And guess what? Africa became the chessboard. Countries were propped up or toppled based on their allegiance to one superpower or the other. The well-being of African nations was secondary to geopolitical interests. African historian. The legacy of colonialism is still very much alive in Africa. The arbitrary borders drawn by colonial powers have left a lasting impact, creating ethnic tensions and conflicts that continue to this day. The Cold War further complicated matters as African nations were often used as pawns in a larger geopolitical game. The scars of these historical injustices are still visible in many aspects of African society. Section 5, From Colonizers to Kingmakers, America's Role in Africa. Let's talk about America's role in all of this. The US loves to present itself as a beacon of democracy and freedom. But its track record in Africa tells a different story.
From supporting coups to propping up dictators, the US hasn't exactly been a force for stability. Remember Patrice Lumumba? The democratically elected leader of Congo, the CIA had him assassinated. Why? Because he dared to challenge Western interests.
And let's not forget about the countless other African leaders who met untimely ends after standing up to Western powers. It's a pattern, folks, a pattern of interference and destabilization. Section 6. The blame game won't feed the hungry, holding the West accountable. It's easy to point fingers, but blame alone won't solve anything. We need accountability.
The West needs to own up to its role in creating the mess we see today. The IMF and World Bank need to be held responsible for the harmful impacts of their policies. They can't just waltz in, impose their will, and then wash their hands of the consequences.
Western nations need to stop acting like they have all the answers. They need to stop imposing their solutions on Africa. It's time for a new approach, an approach based on partnership, not paternalism. Section 7. Empty embassies, empty promises, a call for justification. Here's a radical idea. How about we close down Western embassies in Africa until they can justify their presence?
If these embassies are truly there to help, let them prove it. Let them show how their presence benefits ordinary Africans. Let them demonstrate how they're working to address the historical injustices that continue to plague the continent.
If they can't, then maybe it's time for them to pack their bags. Maybe it's time for Africa to chart its own course, free from Western interference. Section 8. Leveling the playing field. Rethinking global finance. The global financial system is rigged. It's like a game where the rules are constantly changing to benefit the wealthy and powerful. Developing countries are playing with a stacked deck.
The IMF and World Bank are often seen as instruments of this unfair system. They perpetuate a cycle of debt and dependence. It's time for a fundamental overhaul. We need a new system that's fair and equitable, a system that gives developing countries a real voice, a system that supports sustainable development, not just short-term profits, a system that works for everyone, not just the privileged few.
Section 9. Seeds of Change, African Solutions for African Problems. The good news is, there's hope. Across Africa, we're seeing incredible innovation and resilience.
People are coming up with creative solutions to their own problems. From mobile banking to sustainable agriculture, Africans are showing the world that they're not waiting for handouts. They're taking control of their own destinies. It's time for the world to pay attention. It's time to support these homegrown solutions, because the future of Africa will be built by Africans themselves.
Section 10. A brighter future towards a more just and equitable world. Imagine a world where every country has an equal opportunity to thrive. A world where the legacy of colonialism and exploitation is finally addressed. A world where global systems are designed to benefit everyone, not just a select few. This might seem like a pipe dream, but it's a dream worth fighting for. It's a dream that requires a fundamental shift in power. A shift away from greed and domination towards cooperation and shared prosperity. The dream that starts with each and every one of us. Section 11. The Power of One, a call to action. We can't just sit back and wait for change to happen. We need to demand it. We need to hold our leaders accountable. We need to support organizations working to create a more just and equitable world. Educate yourself about these issues. Talk to your friends and family. Use your voice to amplify the voices of those who are being silenced. Remember, even small actions can make a difference. Together, we can create a ripple effect that will be felt around the world. The time for action is now. The future is in our hands.